Hello guys, welcome to another video. My name is Fizzle, and I'm going to show you how to install MonoGame and take you through a little tour and show you the ropes. So, if you've had MonoGame in the past, the version that you have is probably obsolete because they've moved all to a NuGet style installer. So to install it, you want to open up your Visual Studios 2019. We're going to want to go to, if I can find it, Extensions. And in here, I'm going to type in MonoGame. So you're going to download the project templates here, and that's your first step. And next, you're going to want to exit out, go to your command prompt, and type in this command, .NET tool install -g .NET mgcb editor. Now this what it will let you do is if I type in mgcb editor into my command prompt, it will open up the pipeline editor, which will allow you to have your textures, your music, your fonts, everything like that. So this is required. Next, let's open up Visual Studios again, and instead of opening without code, we're going to create a new project. As you can see in my recent project templates, it's already here, but if you just type in MonoGame at the top, you can see all of the packages and applications that you've installed. So the one I'm going to pick is DirectX Windows Desktop Application. And I'm going to call it tutorial, Fizzle tutorial, why not? Might take a second to load up. And you'll be brought to this solution. You'll have dependencies, which you're not really going to touch, your content, which we will talk about later, an app manifest, which every project comes standard with. This holds all your keys and everything like that. You're not going to touch that. Your game one, which all of your code is going to pretty much be in. Your icon, so if you want to change your icon, like your game icon when you launch or with the game when it builds, you're going to edit this. And your program CS, which you're not going to touch. This is your entry point to the project, but MonoGame has already set this up for you. So, what do we talk about first? Okay, we're in our game one. We can rename our game one to anything by pressing Ctrl-RR, and I can just call this tutorial game. Why not? And in this, we have two initialized global variables, which is a graphics device manager and a sprite batch. Graphics device manager allows you to change windows, focus windows, change the aspect ratio, and just pretty much things like that. And sprite batch allows you to draw, write, do all of that cool stuff. So because I'm not a fan of the underscore and I'm used to camel case, I'm just going to press Ctrl-RR and backspace and get rid of these underscores, because I don't want to have to type an underscore every time I want to use the variable. Now we have our constructor, and in our constructor it initializes our graphics field. It initializes where our content is stored, and with our content, that's where all your files such as fonts, music, textures, sprites, all of that goes. And it will show that mouse is visible. If you want to have your own custom mouse, you can set this to false, but when I launch it with F5, you're not going to have a mouse, so it's pretty bleak. So I recommend until you actually get a custom mouse setup, or if you don't want to, just leave it as is. Next is your initialization. In your initialization, whenever you have music, fonts, sprites, all that crap, you initialize it in here. This will run once, only when the program calls upon it. And in your load content, this is where you actually load your sprites and music and fonts. So as an example, let me say private texture 2D, which is the texture 2D library, and I'm just going to call this background. Since I don't need to initialize it, I can just go straight into the content and say background equals content.load texture 2D, and it's a type T, and in these parameters here, it will first go to the content folder. So let's say I have a item. Well, better way to do this. Let's go back to that in a second. So here's your content MGCP. When I double click it, it'll automatically open up to the directory that our file is, so we don't have to go to file, open, blah blah blah. In order for you to be able to do that, when you have the pipeline installed, you're going to right click, open with, and set the MGCB editor WPF as your default. So let's talk about this for a little bit. I like to be organized, so I'm going to add a new folder and call this textures and one of fonts. Let's start, instead of a texture, let's start with a font, because we don't need any textures to build upon that. We can add a new item, a sprite font description, not localized, and I'm going to call this text font. Now if I save and build it, as we can see there's no errors and it's gone through. We can see that in the content directory, if we open up fonts, we have this XML style font sheet. We can change pretty much anything in here. I can change the size. Let's make it a nice 24. I can change the font, Comic Sans MS. Let's say NS, and if we save it and we rebuild it, we have an error. Change it to MS, and it goes through. So you'll know that if you've screwed up the font name, this uses any local font in your directory, your system Windows directory. I'm not sure about Linux, I haven't tried it out. And we can bold, we can italic, let's say bold, and rebuild. So now we won't really have any font showing or anything really happening. It's just a nice blue window. But let's get this font working. So in order to call it, I'm going to use my modifier, sprite font. I'm going to call this text font, and that's it. Now inside of our load content, it's a text font equals content load a sprite font. So whenever you load something like a font, a texture, music, you're going to pass through, when you load it, the name of the variable equal to content.load. It takes the type, so since ours is a font, it's going to match that. And in here, it's going to ask for our directory. So since it's already in content, we can see that it's in font, and its name is text font. We don't need to add the XMB or whatever extension at the end because it's already converted to that. Let's say I add an S to that, and there's no such local directory. We will get an instant runtime error. File was not found, so you will know if your file is there or not. I run it again. Everything worked. Let's go to our draw. In order for you to draw, this applies to 2D games only. If you're doing 3D, it's a completely different system, which I'm not going to get into. We have to first initialize sprite batch begin as the entry point and sprite batch end as the end point. Everything you draw and everything you do will be in the middle of these two. If you don't have one or the other, your program will not run. You'll get an error. Another important thing is your graphics device clear is so important because these two functions run 60 frames a second. You need it to clear every second. Otherwise, if you move an object, it'll draw and overlap each other. So let's say you want to move a character and you hold A or D to move it, and it goes like that. If you don't have this line of code, it will draw 60 times a second the character being moved. you will probably crash your computer if the memory gets too high, or crash the program. So you always need to graphics device clear. You can change the color though. I can say pink. We can run it. You got a nice pink. And you can change it to whatever color. The color library has every color you can think of and every shade. It's quite nice. So let's say deep pink. If we also tab in, we can see other options. So we don't usually mess with this, but color options. You know what? I don't even have that library in, but we're not going to mess with that. We don't need to for the case of this tutorial. So let's get some text to display on screen. I am going to create another variable. This is going to be a string. And I'm going to say text message. So instead of having your text just in there, you're just going to want one variable that's initialized once. So this should actually just be a constant string text message equals welcome to my game. Okay, so let's actually draw the text to the screen. We're actually also missing one more piece of information, which I totally forgot about. We need a vector2. What vector2 is point x and y, and this tells it exactly where to draw. So private vector2, let's call this text position. We'll leave it as is. Let's initialize it in our load content. Text position equals new vector2, and it's going to want a x and a y. So let's say screen, or let's just do it at 0, 10. So it'll be like there. You can mess around with all these numbers. So let's do sprite batch dot draw string. The difference between drawString and draw is drawString only draws text. If you try to use this on a different draw with a texture, it will not work. So it wants a font. So we have that. We have text font. It wants the text. We can write it here, but we already have it stored in a constant variable. Text message. It wants a position, which we have again, and it wants a color. We can do this with color dot and white. We'll do white. Actually, we'll do black. Now, if we were to run it as is, wow, we have text, and it looks nice with our Comic Sans and our deep pink background. But this window is really small because MonoGame, well, XNA was supported for the first original Xbox and older monitors. This was the resolution they used, which is, I believe, 800 by 600. So I don't like that. What I'm going to do is create a few more variables. Private const integer screen width equal to 1600. And screen height equal to 900. This is the usual bounds I use for my games, unless I have a full screen option. And inside of our initialize, we can say graphics device dot where is it? Viewport dot preferred. Where is it? Oh, they changed it a little. Okay, graphics dot preferred back buffer width equal to screen width. And graphics dot preferred back buffer height equal to screen height. In order to apply these changes, we're going to need to call the graphics apply changes void. And there's a few other cool things we can do in this initialize. There's a window. We can do window allow user resizing false. Window allow alt F4 true in case that our program crashes but doesn't exit. And we can do window title. And now if we run the program, we have a nice big screen, we have our title, we can alt F4, and it works perfectly. I'm going to show you guys two other things here. We're going to do a texture now. So let's do private texture 2D. I'm going to call this background. And with the texture, you're going to need a rectangle. Like so. These are the only two pieces of information you need for textures, for the most part. Now, let's instantiate these. So, let's say background, so equals content, load, and it takes in the type, so it is a texture 2D. And we don't actually have a texture yet, so let me go add an existing item. Sure. Just go rename this to map. Actually, I think we already did that. This should just be a map as well. Okay. Add it, save it, and build it. Perfect. Built with no errors. So now that we know where our texture is, it is in content, textures, map. There it is. And our background rectangle is going to be equal to a new rectangle. And what are we going to want to do? Well, we want it to, rectangle takes in 4 pieces of information: a start X, a start Y, the width, and the height of the object. So I want it to draw for the whole screen. So I'm going to do 0, 0. We're also going to do, let's scroll up and see, graphics, oh. Dot view, fixed device, viewport dot width. I'm gonna copy this over and go to height. So when it loads in, whatever screen resolution you are, it will adjust to that. And that's all we need. Now we can draw it. So because I want the text to be in front of our texture, we're going to draw it back here. So sprite batch dot draw. We're going to say background rectangle, and a color dot white. So what colors do in the case of textures is it tints it. So if you say like red or gray or whatever, it will tint it to that color. Let's run it. Here we go. Now, let's say you want to have a little player. Let's go to Paint. And let me resize to about 100 by 100. A nice little, oh, except don't keep aspect ratio. Okay, a nice little square. Let me save that on my desktop as player. Okay, let's go and add a new folder. And I'm going to call it sprites. Let's add an existing item, and we're going to find player, add it, save it, and we can see it got added with the sprites folder. So let's draw and make the player move. We're going to need a texture for the player. We're going to need a rectangle for the player. And we're going to get him to move. So we're going to need a keyboard KB. Oh, keyboard. Is it state? Okay, private keyboard state KB. Let's load him in. So we'll load them in after, just for continuity. Player text equals content load. It's another texture. It's in sprites, and he's named player. Player rect is equal to a new rectangle. We're gonna have him first drawn, let's say 500 by 500. And we're going to pass through player texture width and player texture height. So now the player will be 100 by 100 pixels based off of this here. So if that changes, these will automatically change. Let's draw our guy. Sprite batch. Draw. player texture, player rect, color white. If we run the program, you can see our black box, but nothing's happening. He's actually a little bit big for my liking. Give me a second here. Let's just divide it by 2. Okay. Let's say KB equals keyboard dot get state. If KB is key down, key code D player rectangle dot x plus equals actually it should be a flow equals 5f. I'll lose the decimal placement. So since we're not working with the vector, that's fine, that's fine. Okay. Okay. Else if KB is key down, key code let's do up and down. And else if KB is key down, keys dot s player rect plus equals player rect dot y plus equals speed. Run it, and let's see what we get. So this is basic movement, but as you can see, an issue is that the player, if you hold down 2 directional keys at once, gains double the velocity. In order to do this, we'd have to come up with a more complex, well, it's not too complex, but a different pattern of movement where you're basically adding velocity to the character's positions and checking it. And checking their velocity, make sure it doesn't go over. But let's say we only want them to be able to move one direction. Else if, how do we do this now? Oh, well, this seems to work. So whatever input we do only allows them to move one way, even though I'm pressing all the buttons. This is one way to fix it, but it becomes static movement, and some RPGs use this kind of movement, but it's very unrealistic and kind of not smooth, so yeah. Also, I can move the text around if I wanted to. As a final test, we'll do that. So I'm going to say texture rect, or text position dot x plus equals speed, and every frame it'll move. So that's a basic way how to get your MonoGame set up and a few things you can do. I will be out with the next tutorial shortly, depending on what you guys need. Thanks for watching.